years that we didn't speak to one another. And I'm glad we're talking again.
At 56, Will Smith steps out from decades of speculation and finally opens up about Janet Hubert, the original Aunt Vivian of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. For years, fans, media, and Hollywood insiders have whispered about the tension between the two stars. Rumors of clashes, creative differences, and personal grievances that seemed too sensational to ignore. Now, decades later, Smith breaks his silence, offering his perspective for the first time. His words don't just revisit old headlines, they add context, reflection, and perhaps even reconciliation to a story that has long divided fans and shaped public perception. What does Will Smith reveal about Janet Hubert that we didn't know before? How does he address the infamous feud that haunted a beloved show and its cast? Stay with us as we uncover the full story. Willard Carroll Smith Jr., known to the world simply as Will Smith.
Will Smith, born Willard Carroll Smith Jr., is a triple threat in the entertainment industry.
Was born on September 25, 1968, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a city steeped in culture, music, and the kind of grit that shapes ambition. From a young age, Will was not just a bright kid, he was a force of nature. He had charisma that drew people in, a sense of humor that lit up rooms, and an intelligence that made adults stop and take notice. It wasn't enough for him to simply fit in. Will wanted to stand out. By the time he was a teenager, Will had begun carving out his path in entertainment. He started as a rapper, gaining local fame as the Fresh Prince, alongside his childhood friend DJ Jazzy Jeff. Their music wasn't just about beats and rhymes, it was storytelling that captured the realities of youth with humor and honesty. Early hits like Parents Just Don't Understand weren't just catchy, they were glimpses into Will's ability to connect with an audience, to make them laugh and feel at the same time. But the music was only the beginning. Will had the eyes of Hollywood upon him, the kind that sees potential and doesn't blink. In 1990, he made the leap to television with The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, a show that would define his early career. Audiences fell in love with the story of a street-smart kid from West Philadelphia who was sent to live with his wealthy relatives in Bel-Air. It was a narrative ripe with comedy, culture clash, and charm, and Will Smith became the heart of it. Behind the scenes, though, Hollywood's glitz hid pressures few could imagine. The industry demanded professionalism, charm, and constant energy, and Will provided it all. He was only in his early 20s, yet he carried the responsibility of carrying a show, representing a generation, and balancing the expectations of fans, producers, and his own rising ambitions. Every scene, every line, every look was scrutinized. Every smile and comedic timing carried weight. He thrived under it, but the cost of maintaining that persona was invisible to most. It was also during this early period that Will's relationships with the cast began forming and fraying. Among the most significant was Janet Hubert, the original Aunt Vivian. She wasn't just a co-star, she was a formidable presence on the set, a talented actress with a commanding voice and an undeniable influence on the show's dynamic. Her role required navigating both the comedy and the social commentary embedded in the series, and she did so with skill and grace. But the energies between Will and Janet, while magnetic on screen, were increasingly tense off-screen. By the end of the first few seasons, whispers of disagreements began circulating, rumors that would later become one of television's most notorious behind-the-scenes feuds. Young Will, ambitious, hungry for success, and learning how to navigate stardom, faced challenges that no one outside the studio could fully understand. Every decision, every performance, and every off-camera interaction carried implications that would linger for decades. This was the world Will Smith entered at the dawn of his career.
Comedy, drama, action. Will Smith can do it all.
A bright, magnetic, and talented young man thrust into fame, facing complex relationships with colleagues, all while the cameras captured only the polished result. Little did anyone know that the story of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was far more complicated than the episodes themselves, and that the tension between Will and Janet Hubert would cast a long shadow over both of their lives. It was a beginning filled with promise, laughter, and the first hints of conflict that would define years of public fascination. When The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air premiered in September 1990, it was an instant sensation. Audiences were captivated by Will's charm, his humor, and the way he brought the character of the Fresh Prince to life. He wasn't just an actor, he was a phenomenon. Ratings soared, media outlets couldn't get enough, and Will Smith became a household name almost overnight. But behind the cameras, the story was far more nuanced. Janet Hubert, cast as Aunt Vivian, was a seasoned actress who had seen the harsh realities of the industry before. She brought authenticity, strength, and an unwavering commitment to her craft. She demanded respect, professionalism, and often clashed with those who didn't meet her high standards, including the young star who was rapidly becoming the face of the show. Conflict between talent and ambition is nothing new in Hollywood, but the friction between Will and Janet was complex. Will was eager to assert himself, to shape his career beyond the sitcom. He had his eyes on music, movies, and a future that went far beyond the walls of the Banks mansion. Janet, meanwhile, was fiercely protective of the show's integrity and the quality of performances. She pushed for scripts to reflect authenticity, for characters to evolve naturally, and for young Will to recognize the nuances of dramatic acting, not just comedy. Tensions manifested subtly at first. Disagreements over dialogue, differing interpretations of scenes, and moments of private frustration. On set, Will's charisma could charm anyone, but Janet's confidence and insistence on professional rigor created a clash of styles. Producers, often caught in the middle, had to navigate these currents carefully, balancing ratings, audience expectations, and the chemistry of the cast. Fans saw laughter, humor, and heartwarming family moments on screen, but the off-screen dynamics were a storm waiting to erupt. The industry, ever hungry for drama, started noticing. Rumors circulated, whispered in hallways, and occasionally leaked to tabloids. The narrative was simplified in the public eye: a rising young star versus a difficult co-star. Reality, however, was far more complicated, nuanced by ambition, personality, and the pressures of stardom at a young age. By the third season, cracks were showing. Behind the scenes, meetings grew tense, and creative differences became personal conflicts. Will was beginning to explore opportunities beyond the show, while Janet felt increasingly marginalized despite her seniority and contributions. Their clash, rooted in professionalism, ego, and vision, would eventually explode into one of television's most notorious celebrity feuds, a story that remained largely untold for decades. And yet, despite the tension, the show thrived. Ratings remained high, and audiences adored the chemistry, both real and imagined, between the characters. Will Smith was cementing his status as a superstar.
One of the most beloved celebrities in the business, the Fresh Prince knows what it takes to excel in music and film.
And Janet Hubert, though increasingly frustrated, continued delivering performances that resonated with viewers. The contrast between public perception and private reality was stark, a dichotomy that would follow both actors for decades. By the end of the early 1990s, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was more than a show. It was a cultural phenomenon, a symbol of 90s television, and the launching pad for Will Smith's legendary career. Yet beneath the fame and success, a complicated story of tension, ambition, and misunderstanding was taking shape, one that would not see resolution for over 20 years. The departure of Janet Hubert from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air after the fourth season was shocking. Though rumors had been circulating for months, the media painted a picture of a bitter feud, of unresolvable conflict between the rising star, Will Smith, and the formidable Aunt Vivian. Fans were confused, disappointed, and hungry for details, but the truth was never simple. Hubert's exit was officially attributed to creative differences, a vague explanation that left much room for speculation. Behind the scenes, however, the situation was far more intricate. Janet had endured years of professional clashes, struggles for recognition, and personal frustrations. She had fought to maintain a level of quality and integrity in her performance, while navigating the pressures of a young co-star whose career trajectory seemed unstoppable. For Will, the experience was transformative. He was learning how to navigate the demands of fame, public perception, and his own ambitions. The industry was ruthless, and the fallout from Janet's departure became a cautionary tale about how power dynamics, age, ambition, and personality could collide on a high-profile set. After Hubert left, media coverage escalated. Headlines labeled her difficult and Will the golden boy, a narrative that simplified a far more complex reality. Over the next decades, both actors would rarely speak publicly about the details, leaving fans and gossip columns to fill in the gaps. The story became legend, mythologized by time, memory, and selective storytelling. Will's perspective, until recently, remained private. Interviews would skirt the issue, comments were brief, and any acknowledgement of conflict was tempered with humor or diplomacy. For years, he carried the weight of public perception, the knowledge that one of his early career's most significant relationships had fractured, and the awareness that the truth was layered, nuanced, and uncomfortable. For Janet Hubert, the aftermath was equally complex. She continued acting but faced the harsh realities of typecasting and the industry's reluctance to embrace women who challenge authority or push for equity on set. Her departure had professional and personal consequences, and the silence surrounding the feud contributed to a sense of erasure from a story she had helped define. This chapter of both actors' lives was defined by absence of reconciliation, absence of clarity, and absence of the public hearing the full story. And yet, the seeds of reflection, understanding, and eventual revelation were planted here. The tension, pain, and misunderstanding of this period would linger, shaping the narrative that Will Smith would only feel ready to share decades later, at the age of 56. For more than 2 decades, the story of Will Smith and Janet Hubert remained largely untold. The public had their version, a rising star clashing with a difficult co-star, a feud boiled down to gossip columns and late-night jokes. Yet for Will, the reality was far more complex, layered with emotion, growth, and the kind of hindsight only years of experience can provide. By his early 50s, Will had achieved what few could imagine. He had transitioned seamlessly from television star to global film icon, with blockbuster hits like Men in Black, Independence Day, and Ali solidifying his status as one of the world's most bankable actors. Yet personal reflection often revealed the shadows behind the spotlight. Fame, success, and wealth could not erase the lingering tension from the show that had made him a household name. It was a combination of personal growth and external prompts that pushed Will to revisit the past. He had spent decades mastering his craft, navigating Hollywood's unforgiving terrain, and understanding himself in ways he hadn't at 22. As he approached his mid-50s, there was a sense that reconciliation, or at least acknowledgement, was overdue. The story with Janet Hubert had become a chapter in his life that demanded honesty, both for himself and the audience who had followed him from the beginning. The challenge, however, was monumental. Publicly addressing the feud meant revisiting moments of conflict that were emotionally charged and professionally significant. It meant admitting mistakes, acknowledging misunderstandings, and confronting the lingering effects of youthful ambition on another human being. For Will, the process was both humbling and daunting. It required peeling back the layers of ego, pride, and years of carefully curated public persona. Yet, it was also necessary. The passage of time had brought perspective, a clarity that could not exist in the heat of youth. He realized that while the feud was once a source of tension, it also offered lessons about empathy, communication, and the profound impact of ambition on relationships. There was also a recognition that Janet Hubert's contributions to the show had been immense, shaping the tone, quality, and cultural resonance of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. In interviews, speeches, and behind-the-scenes reflections, Will began to address the past with a candidness previously unseen. He spoke not only about the professional disagreements that had sparked conflict, but also about the human side of it, the misunderstandings, the insecurities, and the pressures that young actors face in a high-stakes environment. The words were measured, honest, and at times self-critical, painting a picture of growth that few had witnessed. As the conversation became public, fans were struck. For years, Will Smith had been a figure of charm, charisma, and blockbuster success. Now, he revealed vulnerability, a willingness to confront past mistakes and honor the complexities of those who had shaped his journey. It was a reminder that even legends carry human flaws, regrets, and the need for resolution. By sharing his perspective, Will set the stage for a broader discussion, not only about Janet Hubert, but about the pressures of Hollywood, the cost of early fame, and the nuances of working relationships. It was a story that transcended gossip, revealing the depth behind a headline feud and offering insights into the personal evolution of a man whose public image had always been larger than life. In 2024, at the age of 56, Will Smith chose to speak openly about Janet Hubert in a way that had never been done before. The revelation was not about blame, scandal, or dramatized conflict. It was about truth, acknowledgement, and reflection. For decades, fans had speculated, debated, and created narratives about the infamous feud. But Will's words cut through the noise, offering clarity that had long been absent. He described the early years on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Excuse me, but what happened to the little lady y'all promised me?
With nostalgia tempered by honesty. He recalled the pressures of carrying a hit show at such a young age, the constant scrutiny of the press, and the weight of expectations from producers, co-stars, and audiences. Yet he also acknowledged the friction with Janet Hubert, not as a villain versus hero story, but as a clash of strong personalities navigating the high-stakes world of television. Will's account highlighted the complexity of working relationships in Hollywood. He admitted to youthful impatience, ambition, and at times a lack of awareness of the emotional toll his actions had on others. He praised Janet for her talent, her professionalism, and her fierce commitment to the show's success, recognizing that her presence elevated the series and challenged him to grow as an actor and a person. The revelation was also a moment of personal catharsis. Speaking publicly allowed Will to confront the lingering guilt, regrets, and unresolved feelings that had accumulated over decades. It was not a performance or a PR move. It was a deeply human acknowledgement of mistakes, growth, and reconciliation with the past. For fans, it was both shocking and enlightening, revealing dimensions of Will Smith the performer and Will Smith the man that had never been visible on screen. Importantly, Will's words reframed the public perception of the feud. No longer was it a simple narrative of a young star outshining a co-star. It was a story of collaboration, conflict, and learning. He painted a portrait of Janet Hubert as an essential figure whose contributions and strength had been undervalued in public discourse, reminding audiences that behind every beloved show lies a network of talents, relationships, and sacrifices. The conversation sparked renewed interest in the history of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, prompting fans and media alike to revisit the show with fresh eyes. Episodes were re-examined, interviews revisited, and the legacy of Janet Hubert's portrayal of Aunt Vivian was celebrated anew. Will's revelation became a moment of cultural reflection, highlighting the need to recognize nuance in stories that had long been simplified for entertainment. By sharing this chapter of his life, Will not only offered closure for himself, but also contributed to a larger dialogue about accountability, acknowledgement, and the ways personal and professional growth intersect in the world of entertainment. At 56, he reminded everyone that fame does not absolve responsibility, and that honesty, even decades later, can heal, educate, and transform narratives once dominated by speculation. The reaction to Will Smith's revelation was immediate and multifaceted. Fans, critics, and media outlets dissected every word. eager to understand the true dynamics behind one of television's most talked-about feuds. But perhaps most significant was Janet Hubert's response, which added an essential layer of depth to the conversation. Hubert, who had long remained private about the conflict, acknowledged Will's words with a mixture of grace, relief, and cautious optimism. She highlighted the importance of honesty and reflection, noting that the acknowledgement of her contributions and the challenges they both faced was long overdue. For her, the public validation of her role and professionalism was more than symbolic. It was a reclamation of a narrative that had, for too long, been simplified and misrepresented. Media coverage amplified the story, framing it as a rare moment of reconciliation in Hollywood, a space often dominated by denial, deflection, or ongoing disputes. Interviews, podcasts, and panel discussions explored the nuances of working relationships, generational clashes, and the pressures of young talent navigating high-profile productions. Will and Janet's story became a case study in ambition, conflict.
Will Smith and Janet Hubert sat down to resolve their differences in the much-anticipated
and eventual understanding. Fans were particularly struck by the human dimension of the feud. Beyond laughter, ratings, and entertainment, the narrative highlighted real emotions: fear, frustration, pride, and the longing for acknowledgement. Social media buzzed with renewed appreciation for Hubert's work, while Will's candid reflections were praised for their humility and honesty. It became clear that both actors had grown through the experience, transforming what was once a bitter conflict into a meaningful dialogue. The conversation also sparked reflection on broader industry practices. Discussions emerged about the treatment of women on set, the pressures faced by young actors, and the long-term consequences of unresolved conflicts in high-pressure environments. Hubert's presence in the dialogue reinforced the idea that her perspective was indispensable, offering insight into experiences often overlooked in mainstream entertainment narratives. Ultimately, the public response revealed a hunger for stories that go beyond headlines, gossip, and caricatures. Audiences wanted nuance, context, and authenticity. By addressing the feud decades later, Will and Janet provided exactly that: a complex human story that illuminated the challenges, triumphs, and evolution of two talented individuals whose legacies were intertwined in one of television's most iconic series. Even as Will Smith achieved global stardom, there was a persistent shadow lingering over his career: the unresolved tension with Janet Hubert. Fame, as dazzling as it was, could not erase the memories of arguments, misunderstandings, and missed opportunities for reconciliation. Will, at 56, admitted that for years he carried the weight of regret quietly, a burden that private reflection could not fully alleviate. He recalled the early days on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, when creative disagreements often spilled into heated exchanges on set. Ambition, youthful energy, and high expectations collided, leaving scars that neither time nor success could immediately heal. Hubert's unwavering commitment to her craft was sometimes perceived as inflexibility, while Will's drive for perfection occasionally clashed with her vision. These were not trivial disputes. They were formative experiences that shaped the trajectory of both their careers and, importantly, their personal growth. Will confessed that his youthful perspective often blinded him to Janet's contributions. What he once perceived as criticism or confrontation, in hindsight, was mentorship and dedication in disguise. With years of reflection, he recognized that many of the conflicts had arisen from fear, insecurity, and the pressures of proving oneself in an industry that rarely forgives mistakes. The revelation was painful but necessary, forcing him to confront not only Janet's role.
Janet, you said this is the real. Let's go back to 2009 when you first left The Fresh Prince.
But his own missteps and attitudes at the time. Regret, however, was not purely personal. It carried professional consequences as well. The public feud had long influenced perceptions of both actors, with gossip columns and social media narratives reducing a nuanced working relationship to a punchline. Will reflected on how much of this could have been avoided if communication and empathy had prevailed. a realization that deepened his respect for Hubert and heightened his desire to set the record straight. By finally acknowledging his role in the conflict, Will opened a pathway to healing. It was not about rewriting history, but about embracing it fully, understanding the layers of human behavior, and taking responsibility for the outcomes of his actions. Fans and colleagues were struck by the sincerity of his admissions, recognizing that public figures rarely display this level of introspection, especially regarding disputes that had become culturally iconic. This chapter of Will's life also underscored the importance of accountability. Success and fame could no longer excuse youthful arrogance or insensitivity. By addressing the past openly, he demonstrated that growth is a lifelong process, and that reconciliation, even decades later, requires courage, humility, and honesty. The weight of regret, once heavy and isolating, was gradually transformed into a tool for reflection, learning, and ultimately, understanding. Will Smith's candid reflections on his relationship with Janet Hubert did more than heal personal wounds. They reshaped cultural perceptions of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. For decades, the public had accepted a simplified narrative: Janet Hubert as the difficult Aunt Vivian, and Will Smith as the charming, untouchable star. The truth, as revealed at 56, was far more complex, revealing the human intricacies behind a beloved sitcom. The revelation prompted a wave of reassessment in popular culture. Fans revisited the series, paying closer attention to Hubert's performance, her on-screen chemistry with Smith, and her impact on the show's tone and humor. Television critics noted how her presence had grounded the family dynamic, providing balance to the youthful exuberance of Will's character.
Mr. Will Smith! Welcome back to the...
What had once been dismissed as conflict was now recognized as creative tension, a force that enriched the show and contributed to its enduring appeal. Will's public acknowledgement also sparked broader conversations about the treatment of women in Hollywood. Janet Hubert's struggles, previously overshadowed by gossip and controversy, became a lens through which audiences examined issues of respect, equity, and recognition in the entertainment industry. Her resilience in navigating these challenges highlighted systemic issues that had often gone unexamined, creating a larger dialogue that extended far beyond a single television series. Social media erupted with commentary, fan essays, and renewed appreciation for Hubert's work. Memes, once critical, were replaced with admiration. Podcasts and panel discussions dissected the nuances of her contributions, her mentorship, and the pressures she faced as a Black woman in a predominantly male-driven industry. Will's honesty not only vindicated her, but also elevated the conversation about representation, talent, and fairness. The cultural impact went beyond entertainment. It served as a reminder that behind every headline, every feud, and every sitcom joke lies a network of complex human relationships. By revisiting the past with honesty, Will demonstrated that public narratives can evolve, that stories can be corrected, and that legacy is shaped not only by performance, but by acknowledgement, respect, and integrity. Will Smith's reflections at 56 were not merely about setting the record straight, they were a lesson in humility, growth, and the wisdom that comes from decades of experience. By confronting his past mistakes, he illustrated how personal and professional evolution are inseparable, and how acknowledging faults can create profound opportunities for reconciliation. He spoke candidly about the pressures of youth, fame, and the relentless pace of success. In his 20s, the desire to excel often overshadowed empathy, and ambition sometimes blinded him to the impact of his actions on those around him. These insights resonated deeply with fans, many of whom had idolized his talent without fully understanding the human struggles behind it. Smith also highlighted the importance of mentorship, collaboration, and respect in creative work. His experience with Janet Hubert taught him that success is not achieved in isolation, and that talent alone cannot replace professionalism, patience, and emotional intelligence. These lessons extended beyond acting, influencing his later endeavors in film, music, philanthropy, and family life. The public response underscored the power of reflection. By acknowledging his past, Will not only restored a sense of justice for Hubert, but also modeled accountability for an entire generation. It was a reminder that legacy is not defined solely by achievements, but by the character displayed in moments of challenge, conflict, and growth. For Will Smith, the journey was transformative. He had turned decades of unresolved tension into a source of insight, humility, and wisdom, demonstrating that it is never too late to confront the past, honor those who shaped your journey, and embrace the lessons learned along the way. The public acknowledgement of Janet Hubert marked the beginning of a new chapter, one defined not by conflict, but by understanding and reconciliation. Both actors had grown through their experiences, and by sharing their truths, they created space for closure that had long eluded them. Fans and critics alike recognized the significance of this moment. It was more than a reconciliation. It was a cultural lesson about empathy, accountability, and the importance of revisiting history with honesty. The feud, once a source of entertainment gossip, became a case study in human growth, professional respect, and the enduring power of dialogue. For Will, moving forward meant integrating these lessons into every aspect of his life. It reinforced his commitment to treating collaborators with respect, acknowledging contributions, and embracing the human complexities behind every creative endeavor. Hubert, in turn, received recognition and validation long overdue, solidifying her place in television history as a trailblazer whose talent and courage shaped one of the most iconic shows of its era. Ultimately, the story of Will Smith and Janet Hubert serves as a testament to the transformative power of honesty. It reminds audiences that even decades later, the truth matters, perspectives can change, and relationships, no matter how fractured, can be honored with grace, reflection, and understanding. It is a story of growth, reconciliation, and the enduring human desire for acknowledgement and fairness. If decades of tension can finally be addressed, should we see it as reconciliation, or wonder why the truth took so long to surface? At 56, Will Smith finally opens up about his experiences with Janet Hubert, but the impact of his words depends on how we choose to hear them. Before old memories and long-standing rumors resurface, remember, some stories reveal their full weight only once. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.